When we reach this point, it's not about blaming one another. It's about realizing that the time has come to walk separate paths. It's a painful truth, but sometimes love isn't enough to fix what has been broken, and the best way forward is to let go with love. As I reflect on where we are, I can't ignore the fact that something has changed, and the hardest thing is knowing that change may be permanent. It's not about giving up on love. It's about acknowledging that what we once had is no longer sustainable, and that's okay. Sometimes the most honest thing you can do is admit that you're no longer the person you were when you first fell in love. The hardest part of love is realizing that you've changed, and what once felt like home now feels like an unfamiliar place. It's hard to come to terms with the fact that what was once so beautiful is now unraveling, but honesty is the first step toward healing. As much as it hurts, I need to face the reality that we might be better off apart than trying to force something that no longer fits. We've shared so much, but sometimes love evolves in ways we never expected, and it leads us to a place where we need to be honest about the future. It's painful to admit, but I think our time has come, and no amount of wishing can change that fact. What was once so certain now feels uncertain, and I need to honor that by being honest with myself and with you. I can't ignore the truth anymore, even though it's hard to face. We might be nearing the end, and we need to acknowledge it. When love begins to feel like a memory instead of a present reality, it's time to be honest with ourselves about what's left. No matter how much we want to fight for what we had, sometimes the truth is that what was once strong has now weakened beyond repair. There's a sadness in my heart as I realize that the connection we once had may be slipping away, and I need to be honest about that. I never wanted to face this moment, but it's clear now our relationship may have run its course, and it's time for honesty. Sometimes love can no longer be the answer, and it takes great courage to admit when it's time to move on. There comes a time when you have to stop pretending everything is fine and start accepting that things might not be the same anymore. Our story has been beautiful, but it's hard to ignore that the pages have turned, and what we once had might not be enough anymore. It's a painful realization, but the truth is that we might be growing apart, and I need to acknowledge that before it gets any harder. I've tried to hold on, but deep down, I know it's time to face the truth, that our love may no longer be enough. It's hard to say goodbye, but sometimes the most loving thing you can do for each other is to acknowledge when it's time to let go. What once felt like home now feels like a foreign land, and it's time to admit that we might need to part ways. The hardest part of love is knowing when it's time to let go, even though it feels like everything inside of you wants to hold on. In the end, being honest with each other is the best gift we can give, even if that honesty leads us to the painful realization that our time together is over. It's never easy to face the truth, but sometimes admitting that it's over is the first step toward finding peace again. As difficult as it is, sometimes the most loving thing you can do is to let go and allow both of you to heal in your own time. Love can grow and it can fade. The challenge is recognizing when it's time to stop fighting for something that no longer exists. In the silence, I can feel the space between us growing, and it's becoming clear that we may not be able to bridge it any longer. Even though it hurts, I know that facing the reality of where we stand is necessary for us to move forward, even if that means apart. Sometimes the greatest act of love is knowing when to walk away, even when your heart is still holding on. I wish I could turn back time, but the truth is, our love story is changing and it's time to face the inevitable. As much as I want to make it work, I can't ignore the truth. The connection we once had is no longer the same, and we need to accept it. It's painful to realize that the dreams we shared are no longer aligned, but I can't pretend everything is fine when it's not. You can't force something to grow when the soil no longer nourishes it, and sometimes the most honest thing is letting go. Our relationship feels like a chapter closing, and while it's hard to face, I know deep down it's the right thing to do. It's heartbreaking to acknowledge, but the love we once shared has shifted, and I need to face that truth head on. The hardest thing about love is realizing that sometimes you have to part ways, even though the memories still linger. Sometimes the hardest thing to admit is that the love we once shared has faded into a distant memory, and no amount of effort can bring it back. It's painful to face the truth that the connection we once had might be slipping through our fingers, and no matter how hard we try, we can't hold on forever. Honesty is a gift, even when it means acknowledging that the future we imagined together may no longer be possible. When we stand at the crossroads of a relationship, sometimes the only choice left is to admit that it might be time to let go. In the quiet moments, I can't ignore the feeling that the love between us is slowly fading, and no words can turn back time. Sometimes, love isn't enough to fix what has been broken, and I need to be honest with myself about where we are now. Facing the truth can be overwhelming, but it's the first step toward healing, even if that means accepting that our journey together may be ending. The hardest thing about love is realizing that it can no longer be the glue that holds us together, and sometimes letting go is the only option. I never imagined that this would be where we'd end up, but the truth is clear. The space between us feels too wide to bridge anymore. The more I think about it, the more I realize that we're both holding on to something that no longer exists, and that truth is hard to accept. It's never easy to admit that what once felt like forever may be coming to an end. But sometimes the best thing we can do is face that reality with honesty. There are moments when the silence between us speaks louder than any words, and it's a painful reminder that things aren't the same as they once were. It hurts to say this, but I feel like we're no longer the people we were when we started, and that change has brought us to this painful truth. Sometimes it's not about blaming anyone or anything. It's just that we've outgrown each other, and it's time to face that uncomfortable reality. As much as I want to pretend things are fine, deep down I know we're standing on different paths, and the distance between us feels impossible to close. The hardest part of love is realizing that even the strongest bonds can unravel, and it's time to be honest about what we're facing. In the quiet of my heart, I know we've reached a point where no matter how much I wish for things to change, we might be at the end of our story. Sometimes we have to let go of the dream of what we thought our relationship could be and accept that it's time to move on. The hardest thing is not admitting the love is gone, but acknowledging that holding on might be more painful than letting go. Love is meant to uplift, but sometimes it can also show us the truth that we may have reached the end of our shared journey. There's a painful clarity that comes with knowing that our connection has shifted, and it's time to let go before we lose everything. It's not about giving up. It's about being honest enough to realize when we've reached the end of a chapter and it's time to start something new. We've tried so hard to make things work, but the reality is that we're no longer the same people we were when we first came together. The heart is a fragile thing, and sometimes it needs to break in order to heal. Sometimes the best way to heal is to let go. I never imagined that love could feel so distant, but here we are, acknowledging that our paths have diverged, and it's time to face the truth. There's a quiet sorrow in realizing that love, once so vibrant, has turned into something unrecognizable, and I need to be honest about that. It's a painful reality when you realize that the love you once had is no longer enough to keep you together, and the hardest part is admitting it. We all have a limit, a point where we can no longer ignore the truth. This might be the moment where I need to face the reality of us. It's hard to admit, But the spark that once fueled our relationship seems to have dimmed, and it's time for us to accept what's happening. I can feel it in the air, the unspoken words that tell me we're on different pages, and as hard as it is, I need to face it. What once felt like certainty now feels like uncertainty. And the most honest thing I can do is admit that we might be nearing the end. We used to dream together, but now it feels like we're living in separate realities, and the pain of that truth is overwhelming. It's not easy to say, but sometimes love alone can't overcome the distance that's grown between us, and I need to be honest about that. The more we try to hold on, the more I feel us slipping away, and the truth is that it's time to acknowledge the end might be near. There's no shame in acknowledging that a relationship has run its course. Sometimes it's the most honest thing we can do for each other.